Oh, good morning. My name is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group, and it's my pleasure today to have Karen Everstine here with me from USP. And I'm going to let you say what USP stands for because I always screw that up. And recently I attended a conference and USP presented on food fraud, and it kind of opened up my eyes and made me realize some of the differences quality managers in the food industry see between food fraud and different programs we have in place. So I asked Karen to come here today and talk with us about that and get a little bit more into what they're doing over there because they got some really good stuff going on. So good morning, Karen.
Good morning. Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. So USP is the United States Pharmacopeal Convention. We are a nonprofit science-based organization. We're in Rockville, Maryland. And basically USP sets standards for drugs, supplements, and dietary supplements and food ingredients. So these standards are generally used in business-to-business transactions to ensure the quality, the integrity, and the purity of these substances. So whether they be drugs, dietary supplements, or food ingredients.
Okay, that makes sense then. So I can understand why you guys would be concerned with all these different things that are going on with food fraud. And there's been some, as food managers, some big cases out there, especially with melamine. That one pops to mind. And recently, this issue with cumin, where they were putting allergens. So it was peanut shells, right? Where they were putting in cumin?
Yep. Yeah. So, and actually, I've done this myself just to try it out. If you grind peanut shells and add them to cumin, we added it at about a 20% level to show at trade shows and that kind of thing. It looks very much like cumin, and so so I think that's one of the most important points about food fraud, or EMA, as we like to call it in the U.S. is that it can result in some serious health risks to consumers. And clearly that's, our first priority at USP is preventing those health risks. And also, certainly the US FDA, that's one of their primary concerns as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things as in the food industry, we're used to, biosecurity has been around for a while now, which to most quality managers means having employee background checks, making sure that there's no easy way to stick stuff in the product and doors and locks and these type of things. I think there's some confusion around between what biosecurity means and what food fraud means. Could you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think, part of the issue is that both are intentional, but they have very different aims. And so when you're talking about something like food defense or intentional adulteration to make people sick, that's very different from food fraud, because with food fraud, the intent is not to be detected because the point is to make money. And so if you're detected and people get sick, you're losing your revenue stream essentially. So, but I think the biggest point to stress here is that, biosecurity or these food defense measures are mostly going to be at the facility level. So you're doing background checks, you're making sure the appropriate doors are locked and that kind of thing. You want to maintain access to the people that should have access and keep people out that shouldn't have access, because you want to prevent people from adding something intentionally to the food that shouldn't be there. With food fraud, we view this primarily as what the FDA would call supply chain controls. So you are bringing in raw ingredients. If you're a manufacturer, for example, you're bringing in raw ingredients to create a finished food product. And the concern is whether one of those raw ingredients might already be adulterated. So it's something that you're bringing into your facility. It's not something that you usually have to control as much at your facility. So just from a general framework, you would control those two things very differently.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So melamine, back to that earlier example, odds are they weren't trying to hurt anybody. They were just trying to have some type of economic gain, and it ended up that it did hurt animals and people.
Yes. Yes. So they did not want to make people sick. I think the interesting thing with melamine is, when you have people that are perpetrating food fraud, you then create this situation where you're relying on their food safety knowledge, right? So you have these people that are performing what arguably is a criminal act, and then you're kind of putting your food safety in their hands. And so I saw one of your earlier podcasts, and one of the people you interviewed made the great point which is, if you have fraudulent food products, you can't have an effective food safety plan in place because you don't know what you're actually dealing with. And so food safety plans or things like HACCP are built around knowing what the ingredient is or the food product is. And so that's one of the other important points about food fraud. But yes, nobody is trying to make people sick, but people make mistakes all the time, or they get greedy and they start using higher levels of the adulterant than than were originally intended, and then that makes people sick.
That's a good point, Karen. Yeah, so supplier verification, obviously with FSMA, huge, right? That FDA brings it up twice with foreign supplier and just your overall supplier verification program. So I can definitely see that where FDA goes in and does an audit and looks at your foreign supplier verification program and says, how do you know that what you're receiving is actually what you're receiving? And as things stand right now, the answer from most food companies is going to be, well, we get a COA, right? Well, how do you know that's right? That's going to cause people a lot of problems. So what should people start looking for as they're putting together a program like this around food fraud? What things should they look for?
Yes, so food fraud is challenging for a number of reasons. Certainly a lot of the adulterants that are used are unconventional, sometimes hazardous, often unconventional, and again, designed not to be detected. And so I think, one of the questions we get very often is, where do you even start, right? You have this big problem. You want to narrow it down. You don't want to be testing everything all the time. Nobody wants to do that. That's not realistic. And so what we recommend is you start basically with some kind of a pre-screen of, if you're a food manufacturer, what are all the ingredients that you're sourcing? And how do you even bring those down to a number that's reasonable to assess in a food fraud vulnerability assessment, which is what most groups are recommending now at this point. So GFSI is recommending a food fraud vulnerability assessment. BRC is building it into their standards. So, that's where we would start. But if you are sourcing thousands of ingredients, you really need to start kind of one step back and do a pre-screen. That's what we recommend. And so at USP, certainly there's lots of tools out there. I can tell you about a couple that we've developed, but we have a food fraud database. And so that's a searchable database that you can go into. You can put in 5 or 10 or 100 or 1,000 ingredients and quickly kind of sort through and figure out which ones might be the highest priority based on the known history of fraud. And so that's one place to start. And basically what you want to do is get down to a manageable number of ingredients that you can perform an entire assessment on, and then you get down to an even smaller group of ingredients, and those are the ones you focus on with a mitigation plan. So are you doing your own testing? You're saying, well, is the C of A enough? In the cases where it might not be enough, or you really want to ensure the safety and the integrity of that ingredient or that product, maybe you do some of your own testing, you send it out for third-party testing, you have stronger audits that go through, you go to the manufacturing plant, that kind of thing.
And that's the hard part, because it's not what you're looking for. They're putting in things that they know you're not looking for. And so putting together a program to look for those type of things is really challenging.
Yes, it is challenging. So one of the other things I'll say is, if you're looking at things that are at a higher risk of fraud, there's a lot of additional factors to consider other than your kind of traditional food safety factors. So USP also published the food fraud mitigation guidance, and this takes you through a lot of those other factors. So, what's your supplier relationship? What's the food safety history of that supplier? What's the economic situation around that ingredient? There's been reports recently of, reduced olive harvest for this season. So something like that, how is that going to affect the risk of fraud in that ingredient? So we have outlined 9 different factors that are worth considering when you're looking at food fraud risk, because again, you do want to take a kind of a broad brush approach to this, because things, adulterants might be unexpected, and so you want to consider some of the other factors that increase the incentive for food fraud.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the presentation I saw, a slide was put up that showed that the price of vanilla at the point of the presentation had spiked up big time. So that's an incentive for somebody to come in, and they're probably not even somebody who normally deals in vanilla, but they see an opportunity to make a quick buck, and that's something that you need to be aware of.
Right, and even if it's not so much about making a quick buck, it could be even just staying in the marketplace at all. Mm-hmm. When you have kind of systemic adulteration that happens and you're just driving down the price continuously, and then it's a matter of even survival in the marketplace. So sometimes the incentives might not even be all that all that terrible. But if you have adulteration that becomes systemic, then that's a real problem, and certainly one we want to address.
Mm-hmm. Well, definitely. I mean, yeah, this book, and I've got my copy here, and there's a awesome chart that you guys have in here that's available in here that lists out those different elements that we're talking about here. And what I like about this is this really parallels what we're used to around HACCP and everything else. It's going through and doing a risk assessment and saying what are those areas that are reasonably likely to occur, to use the old terminology, and how should we then be focusing in on those type of things. So one of the things that I've been doing is people have been putting together their food safety plan is really what you're doing with this process when FDA comes in, back to our audit example earlier, is we're explaining to the regulatory authorities how we're managing risk. And if you have a good program in place and you can walk them through that, that confidence level is going to go up big time with them, because they're going to understand too, you can't cover for everything, but if something does happen, you need to be able to react to that quickly. And this allows you to identify those hot areas of things that you need to focus on.
Yeah, and so I'll say those are all great points, and just a couple things about that. So we certainly recognize FDA's perspective in this area, and so two things USP has tried to do. Number one, if you look at the language that's in the preventive controls rule, the focus is on, like you're saying, reasonably foreseeable or situations where there's been a pattern of EMA in the past. And so, we work really hard. We have a team of analysts that's working every day to find and document the pattern of EMA or of food fraud. And so that's one of the things that's built into the database in direct response to the FSMA rule. Mm-hmm. The other thing is this question of when is something a hazard. So that's the other area that FDA has been pretty clear that they want to focus on is EMA or food fraud related adulterants that could pose a health hazard to consumers. And so USP is a large organization, but one of the things we benefit from is having even a larger group of, we're made larger by these volunteer experts that we work with. So we can pull together panels of people from academia, from regulatory agencies, from industry to tackle these challenging questions. One of those questions was, when is the food fraud related adulterant potentially hazardous? And that we pulled together a panel that worked on that question and created a framework for figuring that out. And we've then implemented that framework for every food fraud related adulterant that we know about to basically tag those ones that might be a potential hazard. And so this is another piece where we're trying to get people more quickly to that answer of what they should focus on because something might be a hazard.
Right. And so, this is a good example of don't reinvent the wheel. So if there's experts out there that are already doing this, and there's a database that exists out there, it's definitely going to be a good investment to look at that and use that within your systems.
Yeah, I mean, we hope so. Our goal really is to make people's lives easier, certainly, because you don't want to be searching through. I mean, we recognize everybody has their hands full with food safety plans as it is, even if you're not tackling the EMA piece yet. But certainly we think that we can get people most of the way there to at least identifying those things that might be potentially hazardous.
Right, and definitely this needs to be something that's integrated within a company's procurement program. This is not something that's just going to sit on the quality manager's desk. This needs to be instituted early on in the procurement process so that when a new ingredient is identified or a new supplier, that there's a team involved between procurement and R&D and operations and quality and legal as well that looks at this and says, all right, what's our risk associated with this? And then you can put the resources to it accordingly. Yeah,
I think you're exactly right. Yes.
Yeah, so like most of the things, this is what I've been noticing with FSMA and well, and one of the points that I've been talking with my clients is FSMA is not going to just be a plant-based program. It's going to be corporate as well. So there's going to be a lot of questions from a corporate side that companies need to think about on how they get this information down to the plant or how they plan on presenting this information from a corporate perspective to FDA.
Yeah, right. And I actually think that's a great point. And EMA or food fraud is kind of a natural fit for something that could be managed or at least partly managed at the corporate level. So certainly you have to consider, I completely recognize there's a lot of facility level factors that need to be considered. But when you're just trying to do this initial pre-screen or pick a set of ingredients that might be ones you want to focus on or things you might want to consider including in your food safety plan, I think all of that could definitely happen at the corporate level and then trickle down to the facilities to save them some of that time and effort.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So it becomes a two-way street. So as the facilities start seeing new things that look funky, so new packaging arrives or the COA doesn't look quite like it used to, that's information that needs to get back into that system so that we can take a look at it.
Yep. Yes, definitely.
Very cool. So awesome information. If people want to go and see this database and get a copy of the pamphlet and start putting together programs, how do they do that, Karen?
I think the best thing to do is to go to foodfraud.org. Everything links there at some point. You can certainly get to an email address to get to one of us there. The database, you can get to the database from there. It's a subscription-based service now, but we do have a 1-week free trial that you can sign up for to even just test it out, see what's in there, see if it might be something that's of interest to your organization. The food fraud mitigation guidance that you held up there a minute ago, that's freely available for download as a PDF document. So I'd certainly encourage people to check that out as well. And then we also have, training and consultancy services, or just reach out to us if you want to chat about any of this and find out more information. There's a group of us that's happy to chat anytime.
Okay. Is there a email address or phone number or something they should call, Karen? Or
Yes. So if you go to foodfraud.org, there's an email address you can link to. My email is just kde@usp.org. If you want to reach out to me directly, that's fine as well.
Awesome. And I've been to the website. It's a really good site. There's a ton of good information there, and definitely get the pamphlet, read through that. It's substantial. It's probably a good, 20 pages or so of information, and they've got examples in there of different food fraud cases. The one with the beet sugar in there, I really like that one. I worked in the sugar industry for a while, so definitely see how people would be tempted to do that. Perfect. So any other points, Karen, you'd like to make, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit on most of them. I'm trying to see if I had any more notes that I wanted to hit on. Yeah, I think you got most of them. I would say the only other thing I would say is, we are working all the time to make sure the database is useful to people. And so if you have if you can check it out and you have some comments or some questions, reach out to us because, again, as I mentioned, we're actively working to make it as useful as possible, and certainly as FSMA is implemented. So
definitely, yeah. I mean, yeah, I've been very impressed. It's very good work and definitely needed out there. So Karen, thank you very much.
Thanks for your time.
You bet. Once again, this is Brian Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. I can be reached at my website, foodleadershipgroup.com, and my email is barmentrout@foodleadershipgroup.com. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, talk to you later.
Okay.